On my wedding night, my own father broke down the cabin door and screamed, "You're mine! No one touches what's mine!" He grabbed me by the hair to drag me away. But what my husband did that night saved my life and destroyed the monster who raised me. Hi, my dear ones. Hi, my sweethearts. It's so good to have you here with me today. Sit down, make yourselves comfortable, because Grandma is going to tell you a story I've carried in my heart for many years. My name is Clara Mae Henderson. I'm 76 years old, and I was born and still live here in Millbrook, Tennessee. This is my land, you know, where the cold north wind blows hard in winter and where the smell of wood smoke fills the streets when the real cold comes. These days, my days are pretty peaceful, thank God. Every morning, bright and early, I wake up to the singing of birds that nest in the old apple tree in my backyard. I brew my coffee strong and black, the way I learned from my mother when I was a girl, and sit on the wooden porch of my little house. It's a simple house, but it's mine, you understand? One with a lot of sweat and tears, but mine. Before I continue, my loves, I need to ask you for a little something. If you're enjoying our conversation, click that like button down below and subscribe to the channel, okay? Turn on the notification bell too, because every week I come here to talk with you, tell stories, share a piece of my life. You have no idea how good it makes me feel to know there are people on the other side listening to me, keeping me company. And you, my dear ones, who are watching me now, tell me here in the comments, what little town are you watching from, and what time of day did you find this video? In the morning with coffee, after lunch, or already in the evening? I always read all the comments, and I'm so happy to know where you're from and when you take a little time out of your day to listen to this grandma's stories. Tell me, okay? Let's create a chain of love. Now, taking a deep breath, I need to talk about something I've carried with me since I was a young woman. A story that few know, but that shaped who I am today. It's about the most terrifying and at the same time most liberating night of my life. About a father who imprisoned me in a way that no one saw, and about a man who became my salvation when I needed it most. This story begins way back when I was still a child playing barefoot on the dirt roads of this same Millbrook. My childhood here in Millbrook began in a large wooden house in what they now call the Oak Hill District, but back then it was almost rural. The house sat on a huge lot, had a tall black iron gate, and my father, Frederick James Henderson, insisted on keeping that gate always locked. He said it was to protect us, that the world out there was too dangerous for his family. My father was a man of means. He owned land, raised cattle, sold timber from the oak and pine forests. Back then you still could, you know? He was respected in town, always wore a suit, a wide-brimmed hat, and had a black Ford that was the envy of everyone. People greeted him on the street with respect, some even with fear. He had a strong presence, you know? The kind where when he entered a room, everyone went quiet. My mother, Dorothy Ann, was a petite woman with brown hair always pulled back in a tight bun. She took care of the house, cooked, embroidered, but was far too quiet. Today, looking back, I see that she lived on tiptoes, as if afraid to make noise. She taught me things in whispers, how to make biscuits, how to wash clothes, how to tend the chickens in the yard, but always looking at the door, always attentive to my father's footsteps. I had a brother, Robert, 3 years older than me. He was like my father, strong, a man of few words, and from early on, my father took him into the business, teaching him to be a real man, as he said. Robert protected me when he could, but as he grew older, he became more and more like my father, and that protection disappeared. Our routine was very set. I woke up with the rooster's crow, helped my mother make breakfast, homemade biscuits, butter, fig preserves, fresh cheese. My father sat at the head of the table, and we ate in silence, only speaking if he asked something. After breakfast, I had to study. My father hired a private teacher, Miss Hilda, because he didn't want me going to school with just anyone, as he put it. I liked Miss Hilda. She was sweet, patient, taught me to read, write, do arithmetic. But the lessons were right there in the house, in the little room my father called the library. I'd look through the windows at other children passing by on the street, laughing, playing, and I'd want to be out there with them. When I finished my lessons, I could play in the yard, but only in the yard, never on the street. My father said that a family girl didn't hang around on the street like riffraff. I played alone most of the time, made little houses with stones and sticks, talked to the chickens, climbed the apple tree in the back. Sometimes Teresa, daughter of our housekeeper, Mrs. Ella, would play with me. She was my age, had short curly hair, and we'd make up games, house, school, pretend tea parties. But I noticed my father didn't like it when Teresa came over. He'd look through the window with a closed expression, and then call Mrs. Ella to give her some errands, and the girl would leave. I'd be upset, but I didn't say anything. We learned early not to contradict my father. When I turned about 8 or 9 years old, I started to notice some strange things. My father began paying more attention to me. It wasn't that normal father attention, you know? It was different. He'd ask where I'd been, even though I'd only been in the yard. He'd ask who I'd talked to, even though I barely talked to anyone. If Miss Hilda complimented me because I'd done well on a lesson, he'd be all proud, but in a way that gave me a tightness in my chest. There was one thing that bothered me a lot. My father wouldn't let me cut my hair. My hair was long, very dark, reached almost to my waist, and he said it was my princess crown. My mother would braid my hair every day, very tight, and my father insisted on watching. He'd run his hand through my braids and say, "That's my girl, my pretty girl." And that, even though I was a child, left me with a chill in my stomach. At family gatherings, Grandma Gertrude's birthday, Christmas, Easter, my father would put me in a pretty dress, make me stay by his side the whole time. If any cousin or uncle came to talk to me, he'd quickly change the subject and pull me away. I was like his decoration, you know? He'd show me off to everyone, but wouldn't let anyone get too close. I didn't really understand what was happening, but there was something heavy in the air of that house. My mother lived tense. My brother didn't play with me anymore, and I felt more and more alone, even though I was surrounded by people. In winter, when the cold pressed in and frost covered the yard in white, I'd sit near the wood stove and stare at the flames. I dreamed of being like that fire, free to dance, to illuminate, to go wherever I wanted. But I was trapped in that big cold house, with that iron gate always locked, and with a father who looked at me in a way that, even as a child, I already knew wasn't right. As I grew older, that look got heavier, and the gate higher, and the world outside increasingly distant. When I turned 13, my body began to change, and with it, my father's behavior also changed. He became more vigilant, more present, more suffocating. I remember my 13th birthday as if it were yesterday. My mother had made a pound cake, my favorite, with cream cheese frosting. She lit 13 candles and sang happy birthday softly because my father didn't like noise. When I went to blow out the candles, my father held my hand and said, looking into my eyes in a way that chilled me, "Now you're not a child anymore, Clara. Now you need to be even more careful. The world out there is full of men who want to take advantage of pretty young ladies. But you're my daughter. I'll protect you. Always." The word always echoed in my head for days. It sounded more like a sentence than a promise. Around that time, my father started taking me along to some appointments, meetings with cattle buyers, dinners with businessmen, Sunday church. He insisted I stay by his side, always in a nice dress, hair down or with a satin ribbon. "This is my daughter, Clara, the jewel of my house," he'd introduce me to everyone. And he'd hold my hand, or place his hand on my back, or fix my hair. Always touching me, always marking me as his property. I started to feel the boys' stares, at church, in the town square when my father took me to buy fabric, at the general store. But as soon as a boy looked in my direction, my father would get closer, pull me by the arm, and cast a look that made the boy quickly look away. Once, a boy my age, the pharmacist's son, came to talk to me after church. He asked my name, said he thought I was pretty. My father appeared out of nowhere, put his hand on the boy's shoulder with such force that I saw him grimace in pain, and said very quietly, but with a voice that cut, "This girl isn't for you. Forget she exists." The boy left immediately, and I felt my face burn with shame. When I was 15, some young men started showing interest in courting me. Small-town stuff, you know? Families knew each other, and parents talked about marriages for their children. Appeared Eddie's son of a rancher friend of my father's. Handsome boy, polite, who had just returned from Nashville where he was studying. He came to dinner at our house with his father. During dinner, he tried to talk to me, asked me some questions about what I liked to do. I answered shyly, happy to finally have someone paying attention to me. After they left, my father called me into the living room. He was standing with his back to me, looking out the window. When he turned around, he had an expression on his face I'd never seen before. A mixture of anger and something else, something that scared me. "You're not going to marry that boy, Clara," he said, his voice low but firm. "But father, I didn't even—" I tried to speak. "I said no!" he shouted, and I jumped in fright. "You think I didn't see? I saw how you smiled at him, how you answered his questions, all animated. You want to abandon me? After everything I've done for you?" Tears ran down my face. "No, father, I don't want to abandon anyone. I just—" He approached, held my face with both hands, squeezing my cheeks. "You're my daughter, mine. No man in this world will be good enough for you. None. Understand?" I nodded, trembling. He released me and left the room. I stood there crying silently, tasting blood in my mouth where he'd pressed too hard. After that day, 3 more young men appeared over the following months. They all left after talking with my father. I never knew what he told them, but they came out pale, fear in their eyes, and never looked in my direction again. I felt like a prisoner. The house had become my cell, my father, my jailer, and there was no way to escape, because where would I go? I had no money, didn't know the world outside, had no one who could help me. My mother lived in her own world, quiet, accepting everything. My brother Robert had left home, went to work in Memphis, and barely came back. It was when I was 17 that I met Michael. He appeared one March afternoon in 1966. My father had hired him to do some carpentry work on the property, fix fences, renovate the barn, build some new furniture. Michael was from Knoxville, had come to Millbrook looking for work. He was tall, broad-shouldered, large, calloused hands of someone who worked hard. But what caught my attention most were his eyes. Dark eyes, deep, that seemed to hold stories he never told. He was a man of few words. He'd arrive early, work all day almost in silence, and leave at the end of the afternoon. But I noticed that, from time to time, he'd look at me. It wasn't a bold look, no, it was different. It was a look of someone who understood, you know, as if he saw that I was trapped there and felt sorry. One day, I was in the yard hanging clothes on the line. My mother had stayed in bed with a headache, and Michael was fixing the back fence. I felt him watching me. I turned my head, and our eyes met. He didn't look away. Neither did I. We stayed like that for a few seconds that seemed eternal. My heart beat so hard I thought he'd hear it from where he was. He went back to his work, but that night I couldn't sleep. For the first time in a long time, I felt something like hope. In the following days, we started exchanging glances, small, quick ones, always being careful so my father wouldn't see. Once, when he passed by me carrying a board, he said very quietly, almost in a whisper, "You deserve to be free." And he kept walking as if nothing had happened. Those words moved me in a way I can't explain. Someone had seen my prison. Someone understood. We started communicating in secret. He'd leave little notes hidden under a rock in the back of the yard, near the apple tree. I'd respond and leave them in the same place. They were simple notes, short but loaded with meaning. "Are you okay today?" "I thought of you. Don't give up." My father suspected nothing. To him, Michael was just another employee, a quiet man who did his work and left. But to me, Michael was becoming the only light in the darkness I lived in. One day, in a note, he wrote, "I can get you out of here, if you want." I held that paper with trembling hands. I cried. For the first time in years, I cried with relief. Someone was offering me a way out. Someone was willing to save me. I wrote back, "Yes, please." And that's how our escape plan disguised as marriage began. But we didn't yet imagine what my father would be capable of when he found out. The following months were the hardest of my life until then. Michael and I continued exchanging notes under that rock, but we had to be extremely careful. My father had finished hiring him for the jobs, but Michael found a way to stay nearby. He got work at a sawmill near Millbrook, and sometimes, on Sunday mornings very early, when my father went to the field to check on the cattle, we'd meet quickly. There was an abandoned chapel on the old road to Bristol, hidden among the pine trees. That's where we'd see each other. I'd make up excuses, tell my mother I was going to Miss Hilda's house to get some books, or that I was going to the corner store to buy thread for embroidery. My mother, poor thing, never suspected. Or if she did, she pretended not to see, perhaps afraid of what my father would do if he knew she'd let me go out. In those meetings, Michael told me about his life. He'd grown up alone. His parents had died when he was young, raised by an uncle who beat him for anything. He'd learned to defend himself early, not to trust anyone, to keep everything inside. But with me, he opened up. He told me he'd never felt anything like what he felt for me, that he'd protect me from anything, that we'd manage to get out of there together. I believed him. I had to believe. He was my only hope. But as the months passed, my father began to notice I was different. I couldn't hide the small light of hope that had been born inside me. He noticed, and he didn't like it at all. One night, in September 1966, my father called me into his study. He was sitting behind the solid wood desk, fingers interlaced, looking at me with that look I'd learned to fear. "Sit down, Clara," he said, pointing to the chair in front of the desk. I sat, hands sweaty, heart racing. "You've been different," he began, his voice too calm, which was always a bad sign. "Smiling more, distracted, as if you were thinking about something, or someone." "No, Father, I tried to speak. He raised his hand, silencing me. "I'm not stupid, Clara. I know when someone's hiding something from me. And you, my daughter, are hiding something." The silence in the room was so heavy I could hear my own heart beating in my ears. He stood up, walked around the desk, stood next to me. He put his hand on my shoulder, squeezing. "You don't need anyone, understand? You have everything here. You have this house. You have food, you have good clothes, you have your father who takes care of you. What man in this world could give you more than I give you?" His hand squeezed harder, and I held back the urge to cry. "None, Father," I whispered. "Exactly, none. So you stop this nonsense of dreaming about Prince Charming. That doesn't exist. What exists is me, taking care of you, protecting you, always." He released me and went back behind the desk. "You can go." I left there, trembling, but more determined than ever. I needed to get out of that house. I needed Michael. The next day, I left a note for him under the rock. "My father is getting suspicious. We need to hurry everything." Michael responded the same day. "I'll figure something out. Trust me." And he figured it out. He discovered that if we went to Bristol, a neighboring town where no one knew us well, we could get married at the courthouse without needing my father's authorization. I was of age, had just turned 18 in October 1966. Legally, I could marry on my own. We planned everything in secret. On January 15, 1967, a Monday with strong sun and blue sky, I told my mother I was going to Miss Hilda's house to spend the afternoon helping her organize some books. My mother nodded without looking into my eyes. To this day, I wonder if she knew, if she'd guessed my plan and let me go because, deep down, she wanted me to be free. I left the house with a small bundle hidden under my shawl. I had a change of clothes, my birth certificate that I'd stolen from my father's study drawer, and a photo of my mother. Just that. I left everything behind. Michael was waiting for me on the old road, near the little chapel, with a truck borrowed from a friend. We went straight to Bristol. At the courthouse, we signed the papers with trembling hands. I became Clara May Henderson Miller, wife of Michael James Miller. The clerk, a gentleman with a gray mustache, looked at us and said, "You running away from something?" Michael answered, his voice firm, "Yes, but now we're running away together." The man nodded and stamped the papers. "Then get going, and good luck." We left there married, but we knew the worst was yet to come. My father would find out. And when he did, he wouldn't accept it. Michael had rented a cabin in the mountains near Gatlinburg, in an isolated place, surrounded by pine trees and thick forest. He said we needed to stay hidden for a few days until things calmed down, until we could plan where we'd live, how we'd start over. We arrived at the cabin in the late afternoon. It was a simple wooden structure with a fireplace, a double bed, a small kitchen, and a porch with a view of the endless green of the mountains. It seemed like a dream. Finally, I was free. But that night, when I lay in bed next to Michael, I felt a tightness in my chest. A bad feeling, as if something was about to happen. Michael held my hand and said, "It's all okay now. You're safe with me." I wanted to believe. But deep down, I knew my father wouldn't let it go. He'd said so many times, "You're mine, always." And men like him didn't accept losing what they considered theirs. I didn't know that that same night, while the north wind whistled outside and the rain began to fall heavily on the roof, my father was already coming after me. He'd found out where I was, and he was coming to take me back. The storm started around 9 at night. The wind shook the cabin windows with a force that seemed to want to tear everything apart. The rain beat on the wooden roof like 1,000 fingers drumming endlessly, and the thunder exploded outside, making the entire structure shake to its foundations. The smell of wet earth entered through the window cracks, mixed with the aroma of smoke from the fireplace that Michael had lit to warm the place. He hugged me tight, saying everything was okay, that we were safe there, protected by the thick forest and the isolation of those mountains. I tried to believe. I wanted so badly to believe. We had soup for dinner that he'd prepared, made with potatoes, carrots, and pieces of sausage he'd bought on the road. The heat of the soup going down my throat brought me momentary comfort. We talked about the future, where we'd live, what kind of life we'd build together. He talked about going to the countryside, buying a little piece of land, raising some animals, planting a garden, having children. 3, at least, he said, smiling in a way that lit up his face. I smiled back, imagining that simple, free life I'd always dreamed of. A life where no one would tell me I was someone's property. Around 11 at night, we lay down. I was exhausted. It had been a long day, full of emotions that had drained me completely. The fear of the escape, the adrenaline of the secret marriage, the hope of a new life, the trip to the cabin. Everything had left me exhausted, as if every drop of energy had been wrung from my body. Michael hugged me from behind, his warm body against mine, his arm heavy and protective over my waist. I felt for the first time in my life what it was to feel truly protected, not imprisoned. It was different. It was like breathing fresh air after years of breathing ashes. It was good. It was peace. I was almost falling asleep, already in that zone between being awake and sleeping, when I heard a different noise outside. A creaking of wood, maybe, or the sound of an engine muffled by the rain. I thought it was a branch falling because of the wind, so I didn't worry. I closed my eyes again, letting the sound of the rain lull me. The noise of the storm was so loud, so constant, that it muffled any other sound. It was as if the world outside had disappeared, and only that cabin existed, that bed, that wool blanket that smelled of mothballs, me and Michael. But then, in an instant that was engraved in my memory like hot iron marking flesh, the bedroom door was broken down. The crash was so loud that for a second I thought it had been lightning striking the house. Wood shattering into pieces, hinges breaking with a horrible metallic snap, screws flying. I jumped in bed, my heart racing so fast it felt like it would come out of my mouth, not understanding what was happening, my mind still caught between sleep and waking. Michael was already getting up, in a quick instinctive movement, positioning his body in front of mine like a human shield. And then I saw him, my father. He was standing in the frame of the destroyed door, drenched by the rain, the black suit he so valued stuck to his body like a second skin, his gray hair always so neatly combed now disheveled, dripping dirty water on the wooden floor, his face red with anger or exertion, or both, and his eyes. My God, his eyes. I'll never forget those eyes. They weren't human eyes. They were the eyes of something that had completely lost its reason, completely lost its humanity. Something wild, wounded, dangerous, like a cornered animal that decides to attack. He didn't look at Michael, not once. It was as if my husband didn't even exist there, as if he were invisible, irrelevant. He looked straight at me, and in that look I saw everything. The obsession he'd harbored for years, the rage of having been contradicted, the madness that had been hidden behind that mask of respectable father he wore in town. "Clara," he said, his voice low but cutting like broken glass tearing skin. "Get out of that bed. Now." I couldn't move. My body had turned to stone. I was paralyzed with fear, the same fear I felt when I was a child and heard him climbing the stairs at night. Michael took a step forward, placing himself between me and my father, his broad shoulders blocking my view. "You don't have the right to be here," Michael said, his voice calm but firm, each word measured. "She's my wife now. We're legally married. There are signed papers, recognized by the courthouse." My father laughed. It was a horrible laugh, hoarse, without any trace of joy, only bitterness and contempt. "Wife! You think a paper changes anything? A paper is just paper. She's my daughter. Mine. I raised her. I fed her. I took care of her all these years. No paper will change that. No man will take her from me." He advanced into the room with heavy steps, and then everything happened too fast and too slow at the same time. My father went right past Michael, or tried to pass, pushing him with his shoulder, and came straight to the bed like an enraged bull. He leaned over me and grabbed my long hair with both hands, wrapping the strands around his fingers, with such force that I felt my scalp burn with pain, as if it were on fire. I screamed. A scream that came from the depths of my soul, a scream of pure, primitive terror that I didn't even know existed inside me. "You're not going to give yourself to him," my father shouted, pulling my hair mercilessly, dragging me toward the edge of the bed, my body sliding over the sheets. "You're mine! No one touches what's mine! No one! You're going to come back home and forget this man exists!" I grabbed onto the sheets with absolute desperation, my nails digging into the fabric so hard I heard threads breaking, my whole body resisting, my legs kicking the air, trying to find support, but he was much stronger. He was pulling me, dragging me like I was a rag doll, and I felt like I was being torn apart inside. It wasn't just the physical pain of my hair being pulled out, whole locks coming out from the roots. It was the pain of seeing that he would never leave me in peace. Never. Even married, even an adult, even having fled to a place where no one knew who we were. He had found me, had come to get me, and he was going to take me back. He was going to lock me in that house again, in that room, behind that iron gate. And this time, I knew deep in my soul there would be no more escape. He would watch me day and night. He would kill me with living. "Father, please!" I screamed, crying, begging, my voice coming out strangled. "Let me go! Let me go! Please!" But he didn't let go. He kept dragging me with that inhuman strength that rage gives people, and I kept holding on to the sheets that were already coming off the mattress, fighting, screaming, crying, feeling that my life had ended there. That everything had been useless. The escape, the marriage, the hope of being free, everything had been an illusion. I would never escape him. Never. "You're going to come back home with me," he said, snarling the words through clenched teeth. "And you're going to forget this man exists. Forget all of this ridiculous marriage, this pathetic escape, because you're not his. You never will be. You're my daughter, my girl, mine." In that moment, something inside me broke. It wasn't my body, despite the pain. It was something much deeper. It was my soul. I felt as if all the air had left my lungs and would never come back. I felt like I was going to die there, in that cabin lost in the mountains, dragged by that man who should have protected me, but who, in reality, was my greatest tormentor, my greatest nightmare, the person who hurt me most in life. And the worst part? No one would know. No one would look for me. We were alone there. That's when I looked at Michael. He was standing a few steps away, recovering his balance after the push, and the expression on his face had completely changed. It was no longer the gentle, quiet man I knew, the one who spoke softly and smiled shyly. His eyes were dark, cold, empty of any emotion I could recognize. But at the same time, there was something burning deep down, way down deep. Something I couldn't name, but that gave me a chill that ran down my entire spine. He was no longer afraid. He was no longer hesitating. He was no longer measuring the consequences. He was decided, and in that endless second, while my father continued dragging me and I continued screaming and crying, I saw Michael move. It wasn't a hurried, desperate movement. It was calculated, precise, controlled, as if he'd done it 1,000 times before, as if some part of him that had been asleep had awakened. The storm outside continued roaring. The wind howled through the trees. The rain continued falling like a waterfall on the roof. And inside that isolated cabin in the middle of the mountains, surrounded by pine trees and darkness, something was about to happen. Something violent, something definitive, something that would change everything forever. Something that would free me once and for all from that man. But I still didn't know the price that would be paid for that freedom. And I still didn't know who the man I'd married really was. What happened in the next few seconds changed my life forever. Michael didn't shout. He didn't panic. He didn't freeze in fear like most men would in the face of someone so furious and determined as my father. He moved with a calm that was almost supernatural, as if time had slowed down just for him, as if each movement had been planned in advance, rehearsed 1,000 times in some dark place in his mind. I saw everything happen as if I were watching from outside my own body. Fear had left me in that strange state where everything seems very sharp and very distant at the same time. He advanced, but it wasn't a clumsy advance of someone desperate trying to help. It was precise, calculated, professional. It was the advance of a predator that had observed its prey long enough and now finally decided to attack. His muscles moved with frightening efficiency, without waste of energy, without hesitation. He passed by me at a speed I could barely follow, and before my father could react or drag me one more inch, Michael grabbed his arm, the arm that held me by the hair, that caused me so much pain. Michael's fingers closed around my father's wrist like an iron vice, squeezing with a force I could see from the tensed muscles of his forearm. And I saw the expression on my father's face change. First, it was surprise, then discomfort. And then, when he finally really looked at Michael, it was fear, genuine fear. He'd finally looked at the man he'd underestimated, and what he saw in that face scared even him, a man who'd spent his life terrorizing others. Michael made a sharp, quick, precise movement, twisting my father's arm in a way that wasn't natural, forcing the joints beyond what they were made to withstand. And I heard. My God, I heard. A horrible crack, like a dry branch breaking under a heavy boot. Then another crack, right after, this one even louder. 2 places. My father's arm had broken in 2 different places. I could see, even in the dimness of the cabin lit only by the fireplace, the strange shape his arm had taken. My father let go of my hair immediately. His hands, the one that still worked, flew to his broken arm in an instinct to protect, to hold, to try to make the pain stop. He let out a scream I'd never heard come from that man. Never. In all the years I'd lived with him, in all the anger I'd seen in him, I'd never heard that sound. It wasn't a scream of rage or indignation. It was a scream of pure, uncontrollable, visceral, animal pain. The scream of someone who had been broken. He fell to his knees on the wooden floor of the cabin with a dull thud, still holding the arm that now hung at an absolutely wrong, horrible angle. The man who had always been so strong, so imposing, so terrifying in my entire life, was there on the floor at my feet, moaning in pain, reduced to absolutely nothing. I crawled back on the bed, still holding the crumpled sheets, trembling from head to toe, my teeth chattering, unable to fully process what was happening. My scalp burned terribly where he'd pulled me, locks of dark hair scattered on the white sheet like black silk threads torn from the roots. But I was free. He'd let me go. His hands were no longer on me. Michael didn't stop. He didn't hesitate for even a second. He bent down, grabbed my father by the collar of his soaked suit with one hand, the fabric making a wet sound when he grabbed it, and by the throat with the other. His fingers closed around my father's neck, and then, in a movement that seemed physically impossible, he lifted my father from the floor. He lifted a grown man, heavy, over 200 pounds, as if he weighed absolutely nothing. As if he were a rag doll. My father's feet hung in the air, kicking, desperately looking for support that didn't exist. His legs kicked the air uselessly. Michael pressed him against the wooden wall of the cabin with such force that I heard the wood crack, splitting under the impact of the body. Little splinters of wood fell to the floor. A small picture that was hanging nearby trembled and fell. The expression on Michael's face was something I'll never forget for the rest of my life. There was no anger there. There was no hatred. There was no satisfaction or pleasure. It was empty. Completely empty. Cold. It was the expression of someone who had done it so many times before that they felt nothing anymore. No emotion, no guilt, no doubt. It was the expression of someone truly dangerous. Much more dangerous than my father could ever dream of being. My father tried to speak, his mouth opening and closing, tried to breathe, choking. His hands, the one that still worked, and the one with the broken arm that he could barely move, scratching Michael's arm uselessly, nails scraping the fabric of his shirt, eyes wide, bulging from their sockets, full of absolute terror. For the first time in my entire life, I saw my father afraid. Truly afraid. Not anger disguised as fear, genuine fear. Fear of dying. The man who terrorized everyone around him, who controlled everything and everyone with an iron fist, was terrified. He was seeing his own death in another man's eyes. Michael brought his face close to my father's face. Slowly, deliberately. So close their noses almost touched. So close they breathed the same air. And then he whispered. His voice was low, almost gentle, but loaded with a coldness that cut deeper than any scream. And in the quiet of that cabin, the storm outside had considerably diminished, as if even nature had stopped to witness this transfer of power. I heard every word, every syllable. "I know what you did to her all these years," Michael said, his voice cold as the north wind that blew in the mountains, each word chosen with surgical precision. "I saw it in her eyes. I saw the way she's afraid of you. I saw how she shrinks when you come near. I know exactly what you are. I know men like you." My father tried to deny, tried to say something, his lips moving desperately, but Michael's hand squeezed his throat tighter, completely cutting off the words, cutting off the air. "You're never going to get near her again," Michael continued, and now there was something in his voice. It wasn't anger. It was a promise, a conditional death sentence. "Never again. You're not going to look for her. You're not going to send anyone after her. You're not going to write. You're not going to show up. You're going to forget she exists. Because if you come back—" He paused, letting the words hang in the air like lead, letting the silence speak for him. "If you try anything, if you send anyone after her, if you even think about her the wrong way—" Another pause, longer, heavier. "I won't break your arm. I'll rip your head off your body. And it's not an empty threat. I've done worse, for much less. And I won't have a second of remorse." My father's entire body became completely paralyzed with terror. Even the pain of the broken arm seemed to have been forgotten before the real concrete threat he was hearing. He believed. I saw in his eyes that he believed every word. Maybe it was the way Michael spoke, without emotion, just facts. Maybe it was the absolute coldness in his eyes. Maybe it was the fact that he'd broken his arm in 2 places in a matter of seconds, as if it were the easiest thing in the world. But my father believed, and for the first time he understood that he'd found someone stronger, someone more dangerous. Michael released his throat abruptly, but before my father could fall or recover his balance, Michael grabbed him again by the suit, spun him with force, and practically threw him, really threw him, toward the destroyed door. My father stumbled, tripped over his own feet that barely responded, and fell face first into the puddle of mud and rainwater that had formed right at the entrance of the cabin. His body made a wet, dirty sound as it hit the mud. His broken arm twisted under him, and he screamed again, a muffled scream from the mud that entered his mouth. He was drenched, covered in brown mud that stuck to his expensive suit, his face, his hair. He was moaning in pain, holding the arm that hung uselessly. He was humiliated in a way I'd never seen. Destroyed. Broken not just physically, but in his pride, in his authority, in everything he thought he was. Michael walked to the door with slow, measured steps and looked at my father down there in the mud, looked down literally and figuratively. And he said, his voice loaded with an authority that accepted no questioning, "Leave, now, and don't come back, because if I see you again, there won't be any talking." My father got up with extreme difficulty, slipping in the mud twice before managing to stand, holding his broken arm against his chest in a protective and useless gesture. The rain was falling on him, weaker now, but still steady, mixing with tears. Tears. I had never seen that man cry. Not when his mother died, not when he lost money and business. Never. But there he was, crying like a child, broken and defeated. He looked at me, one last time, through the open door. And for a second that lasted an eternity, I thought he was going to try again. That he was going to say something, do something. But then he saw Michael standing there at the door, motionless as a statue, waiting, almost wanting him to try, and something in him surrendered completely. The last spark of fight died in his eyes. He turned, slowly, painfully, and began walking with a limp toward the car that was parked on the dirt road, disappearing into the darkness and rain that still fell. We stood there, completely still, listening to the sound of his boots in the mud, the sound of the car door opening and closing, the sound of the engine starting after a few attempts, the car turning around on the narrow road, the tires spinning in the mud, almost getting stuck. And finally, the sound of the engine getting farther away, getting weaker, more distant, disappearing completely into the night. When silence returned, just the rain falling weaker now, just the wind whistling through the pines, just the low crackling of the still-burning fireplace, Michael turned to me. And for the first time since everything had begun, I was afraid of him. It wasn't the same fear I had of my father. It was different. It was fear of not really knowing the person I'd married. Fear of what he'd been. of what he was capable of doing, of what I'd just witnessed. He saw the fear in my eyes. I know he saw it. It was impossible not to see. And something in his expression instantly broke. All that coldness, all that distance, all that controlled violence disappeared. His shoulders fell. His entire body seemed to deflate. He took a step in my direction, his hand extended, but stopped immediately when he saw me instinctively shrink, my body reacting before my mind could process. "Clara," he said, and his voice trembled. For the first time, it trembled. I'm sorry. Sorry you had to see that. Sorry you had to see what I'm capable of. What I used to be." I couldn't speak. My throat was closed. I was processing everything. The man who had terrorized me my entire life was out there, broken, defeated, fleeing into the darkness like a wounded animal. And the man who saved me was here, in front of me, with blood on his hands, metaphorically at least, trembling, afraid of losing me. "I'm not that person anymore," he continued, his voice low, loaded with something that seemed like genuine pain, deep regret. "I was, a long time ago, when I was much younger, before I met you, before I knew it was possible to be different. I was violent. I hurt people. I did terrible things, things I'm not proud of at all, things that haunt me to this day. That's why I left Knoxville. That's why I came here, to Millbrook, to start over, to let that man die and be someone different. Someone better." He ran his hand through his hair, wet with rain and sweat, his eyes shining with something that looked like tears held back for a long time. I swore to myself I'd never use that part of me again, that I'd let it die, buried there in Knoxville along with everything I did wrong. But when I saw him hurting you, when I heard you scream like that, when I saw the terror in your eyes, his voice failed completely. I brought it back. I resurrected that man I'd sworn to bury. For you. Only for you. Because losing you would be worse than going back to being what I was. Tears ran down my face, warm, releasing all the accumulated tension. I didn't know what to feel. Fear? Relief? Gratitude? Confusion? Maybe everything at the same time. Maybe no single feeling was enough to describe it. "He won't come back," Michael said, his voice firmer now, more confident, returning to control. "Men like him, when they meet someone stronger, someone more dangerous, they back down. They're only brave with those who are weaker. They only attack those who can't defend themselves. You're free from him now. Really, forever." And that's when it really hit me. I was free. Really, completely, totally free. The monster who had imprisoned me my entire life had left, defeated, humiliated, with his arm broken and ego shattered into 1,000 pieces. He would never be able to control me again, never be able to touch me again, never be able to look at me that way again, never be able to call me his. It was brutal. It was bloody, even without visible blood. It was violent in a way I never imagined I'd witness in my life. But it was the night I finally, for the first time in 18 years, felt safe. The night I discovered that the man who loved me was willing to bring back his own demons to protect me from mine. The night I became truly free, not on paper, that had happened at the courthouse, but truly free, free in my soul. I got up from the bed slowly, my legs still trembling, and walked to Michael. He stood completely still, not moving an inch, as if afraid to scare me, to make me run, to lose me. I held his face with both hands, feeling the rough stubble against my palms, and looked deep into his eyes. Those eyes that had been so cold, so empty minutes ago, but that now were full of worry, vulnerability, and genuine fear of losing me. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice coming out weak but sincere. "Thank you for saving me, for freeing me, for being strong when I couldn't be." He hugged me then, and I let him. I surrendered to that hug completely. We stood there, embracing in the middle of that destroyed cabin, while the storm finally completely passed. The clouds opened up, and the first golden ray of morning sun began to appear through the trees outside, illuminating the beginning of our new life. Today, at my 76 years, I live here in Millbrook, the same town where I was born, where I grew up imprisoned, and where I learned what it is to be truly free. Seems strange, doesn't it? Returning to the place where it all began. But this town doesn't scare me anymore. It's mine now, my way, on my terms. After that night at the cabin, Michael and I came back here. We rented a simple little house in the Oak Ridge neighborhood, far from that big house with the iron gate where I'd grown up. My father never appeared again. Never. We found out later, through acquaintances, that he'd left Millbrook a few days after that night, sold the land hastily, sold the house, and left. They say he went to the interior of Alabama, to a small town where no one knew him. He died about 10 years later, alone. When they told me, I felt nothing. Not relief, not sadness. Just nothing. That man had already died for me that stormy night. My mother, poor thing, stayed. She came to live with me and Michael a few years later. We never talked about what had happened, she never asked, and I never told. But I saw in her eyes a silent gratitude. She lived with us until she passed away in 1985, sleeping in the armchair after lunch, peaceful. It was a good death, you know, without pain, without fear, different from how she'd lived. Michael and I had 3 children, Julian, who was born in 1968, Marianne in 1970, and Lucas, the youngest, in 1973. I raised them differently from how I was raised. They had freedom, they had affection without prisons, they had a father who was present, protective, but who was never, never controlling. Michael learned to be gentle without being weak, to be firm without being violent. He became the man he wanted to be, and I was proud of him every day. We worked hard. He continued with carpentry, made custom furniture, and became known in town for the beautiful work he did. I sewed for others, made clothes for the neighbors' children, embroidered wedding trousseaux. We didn't have much, but we had enough. And we had peace. Oh, how we had peace. It was 50 years of marriage, 50 years of waking up next to him, of drinking coffee together on the porch, of raising the children, of seeing grandchildren being born. 50 years of a simple life, but full of true love. He never needed to be that man he was that night again. That stayed stored away, buried, and only came out once, to save me. When he passed, 8 years ago, from a quick heart attack while working in the workshop, I thought I wouldn't be able to continue. But I continued. For the children, for the grandchildren, and for myself. Because he would have wanted me to continue. Today I live in this little house we bought together in 1975, here in the Oak Hill neighborhood. Yes, the same neighborhood where my father's house was, but on the other side, far away. It's a small wooden house with a little yard I love. I have my herb gardens I tend every day. The rosemary has grown so much it's become almost a bush. I have my chickens that give me fresh eggs every morning. I have the apple tree I planted as soon as we moved here, and that today already bears sweet fruit that I make into jelly for the grandchildren. My 3 children live here in Millbrook, too. Julian is an accountant, married to Patricia, has 2 adult children. Marianne is a teacher, like Miss Hilda who taught me as a child, and has 3 children. Lucas is a mechanic, works with trucks, and has a daughter, Andrea, who's my most attached granddaughter, the one who taught me how to use the computer. They come visit me every week, taking turns. Sunday, there's always someone here for lunch with me. We make those old dishes, fried chicken, pot roast, cornbread, biscuits with gravy. The house fills with noise, with laughter, with life. It's so different from that silent house where I grew up, where fear lived in every corner. Every Wednesday, I go to the neighborhood farmer's market to sell my embroidery. It's not for the money. The kids want to help me, but I insist on having my independence. It's more for the company, you know? I chat with the other ladies, exchange recipes, find out the neighborhood news. Life is good when it's simple like this. Sometimes, when I'm alone here on the porch, drinking my coffee in the late afternoon, I think about that night, the storm, the fear, the violence, and how that, as terrible as it was my liberation. It was the day I stopped being someone's property and became the owner of myself. I'm not angry at my father. Not anymore. I feel sorry for him. Sorry for a man who loved so wrongly that he destroyed himself and almost destroyed his daughter. But he didn't succeed. I survived. I won. I lived a beautiful life, full of true love, and raised children who know what respect is, what freedom is, what true love is. I look at Michael's picture hanging on the living room wall. The photo was taken on our 40th wedding anniversary, and I'm grateful. Grateful that he was brave enough to use that terrible force he had stored away to protect me. Grateful that he was gentle enough to never need to use it again. Grateful for 50 years of a life I never thought I'd be able to have. Life is funny, you know? We're born in a prison, we learn to survive, and one day, if we're lucky, we find someone who breaks the chains. Michael was my key, my liberation, my home. And today, in this simple house, surrounded by my children and grandchildren, with my garden blooming and my chickens pecking in the yard, I am complete. I am free. I am happy. My dear ones, my loves, if there's someone there listening to me who's going through something similar to what I went through, I want to tell you something. True love doesn't imprison. True love doesn't control. True love doesn't make you afraid. It took me 18 years to understand that. 18 years thinking that was normal, that fathers were like that I had to accept it. But no, my child, no. No one, not father, not mother, not husband, not anyone, has the right to treat you as property. You're not an object, you're a person. You have the right to be free. I learned there's a difference between protection and prison. Protection gives you wings, teaches you to fly, and stays nearby in case you fall. Prison cuts your wings, keeps you on the ground, and convinces you that you were born to crawl. If someone says they love you but isolates you, controls you, diminishes you, my dear, that's not love. That's possession. And you weren't born to be possessed by anyone. I learned that courage isn't not being afraid. Courage is being afraid and still taking the step. I was so afraid that Monday in January, when I signed those papers at the courthouse. My hands were shaking, but I signed, because living with fear every day is worse than having courage for one day. I learned that sometimes liberation comes in forms we don't expect. It comes brutal, it comes violent, it comes painful. That stormy night was terrifying, but it was my liberation. And I'm not ashamed of having needed help. I'm not ashamed that someone had to be strong for me when I couldn't be. We don't need to be strong alone. We need to find those who are strong with us, not against us. I learned that starting over is possible. It's always possible. I started over at 18. You can start over at any age. It's never too late to choose freedom. It's never too late to choose life. If you're trapped in a house where they control you, where they diminish you, where they make you feel worthless, listen to what this grandma is saying. You're worth everything. You deserve to be free. And there are people ready to help you. There are authorities, there are organizations, there are people who understand. You don't have to suffer alone. And if you know someone who's in that situation, don't pretend you don't see. Extend your hand. Sometimes a word, a gesture, an open door can save a life, can be the difference between staying trapped and finally being free. I had 50 years of happiness after a night of terror. 50 years, 3 children, grandchildren, a life full of true love. It was worth every tear, every fear, every pain. Because today, I am free, and you can be too. Now, my dear ones, I need to make a very special, very important request. If this story touched your heart, if you understood the message, if you feel you need to share this with someone who needs to hear it, I beg you, subscribe to this channel now and turn on the notification bell. Because every week I come here to tell stories of overcoming, of liberation, of women who won. And maybe the next story is exactly what you or someone you love needs to hear to have the courage to take the first step toward freedom. And leave me a comment down below with just one word. Free. Just that word. Free. So I know you watched until the end, that you understood, that you're with me in this chain of liberation and hope. Commenting is quick, it costs nothing, but it means the world to this grandma here. Do it now. Don't wait even one more minute. Because maybe tomorrow you'll meet someone who needs to hear these words and you'll be able to share this video. You'll be able to be the key that opens someone's prison. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for being here. And remember, you are free. You deserve to be free. And I'm rooting for each and every one of you. A big hug from this grandma here. Until the next story. When my husband took me to that clinic, he whispered in my ear, "You'll never have children, Clara. I paid the doctor to cut you up inside." But God had other plans, and revenge came from my own womb 3 weeks later. Hello, my dear ones. What a joy to have you here with me this afternoon. Come on in, have a seat. Imagine you're right here in my little living room, having a hot cup of coffee with some homemade pound cake. My name is Clara Beatrice Santos. I'm 73 years old, and I was born right here in Cedar Falls, Iowa. And it's right here where I live to this day, in this town I've carried in my heart since I came into this world. Oh, and before I continue my story, I'd like to make a special request to all of you listening out there. Tell me here in the comments, what little town or big city are you watching me from? And what time of day did you find this video from Grandma Clara? Was it early morning, still having your coffee? At lunchtime? Or in the late afternoon, when the day's rush has calmed down? I always read all the comments with so much love, and I'm so happy to know where you're from and what moment of the day you dedicated to hearing this story. Tell me, will you, my dear? Let's create a chain of love across America and the whole world. And if you can, click that little like button down there and subscribe to Grandparents' Tales. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next stories from this grandma. I promise it's worth it. But I'll tell you, my dear, life hasn't always been so peaceful for me. There was a time, a very difficult time, when I didn't know if I'd have the strength to continue. A time when a man, who should have loved and protected me, tried to take from me what's most sacred in a woman. And this story, as painful as it is to remember, needs to be told. Because today, when I look at my blooming garden, when I see my son and grandchildren playing here in the yard, I know that every tear, every night of fear, every moment of loneliness was worth it. So grab your coffee, settle into your chair, and come with me on this journey that begins back when I was 20 years old, when I was a young woman, full of dreams and innocence, and thought that marrying a rich man would bring me happiness. Oh, if only I had known. I was born right here in Cedar Falls on a cold day in June 1952, when the Iowa winter was already getting serious. My father's name was Arnold Frederick Santos, a tall man with broad shoulders who worked on the ranches around town. He took care of cattle, helped with farm work, and came home always with calloused hands and the smell of leather and coffee. He was a man of few words, you know. But when he spoke, we listened. My mother, Teresa, was the opposite. She talked a mile a minute, laughed loudly, hummed all day while taking care of the house and us kids. We were 5 siblings in total. I was the third, right in the middle of the bunch. There was Lawrence, the oldest, who helped Dad on the farm from a young age. Then came Naomi, about 3 years older than me, who was Mom's favorite and learned to sew and embroider from early on. I came after, and right behind were born the twins, Oscar and Oliver, who were the troublemakers of the house. Wherever they went, it was just shouting and broken things. We lived in a very simple wooden house over on the south side, on a dirt road that turned into a muddy mess when it rained. The house had just 3 little rooms, 1 bedroom where my father and mother slept, another where the 5 of us squeezed into 2 old iron beds, and the living room that also served as a kitchen. There was a wood stove that my mother kept always burning, and it was around it that we huddled on the coldest winter days. The bathroom was outside in the backyard, a little wooden shed we avoided using at night because it was scary. In the yard there was also a chicken coop, some laying hens that provided our eggs, and an apple tree that gave the sweetest fruit I've ever tasted. Our routine was marked by work from early on. I woke up with the rooster's crow around 5:30 in the morning and already had to help my mother. Fetch water from the well down the street, light the fire, prepare coffee and milk for Dad and my siblings. Then, when the sun was higher, I'd go to school, Cedar Falls Elementary, which was about 6 blocks from home. I loved studying, loved picking up those notebooks, writing neatly, learning arithmetic. My teacher, Mrs. Nelson, always said I had a knack for it, that I learned quickly. That made me proud. Coming back from school, around lunchtime, I had to help again. Peel potatoes, wash clothes in the tub, hang them on the line, sweep the house. But when there was spare time, oh my God, how we had fun. Me and the neighborhood girls, Gina, Yvonne, Susie, we played house under the trees, made pretend food with mud and leaves, jumped rope until we got tired. The boys played marbles in the street, flew kites on windy days. And when winter really came, we'd make bonfires in the middle of the street, roast sweet potatoes, stay there telling ghost stories until Mom called us inside. Back then, life was hard, but it was simple too. We had almost nothing, but we didn't know we were poor because everyone around us was the same. My father earned little, and the money barely covered rice, beans, and a piece of meat once in a while. Sometimes we'd eat just cornmeal mush with sausage or bean soup with bone. But my mother had an amazing ability to make tasty food with almost nothing. She always said, "God helps those who rise early, my daughter. We may not have plenty, but we have dignity." I remember when I was about 8 or 9 years old, I started noticing something that made me uneasy. My older sister, Naomi, started receiving visits from a young man. He was about 10 years older than her, son of a rancher in the region, and came to our house from time to time. My mother got all excited about it, tidied up the living room, made a cake, and kept telling Naomi to fix herself up properly, comb her hair, put on her prettiest dress. I saw that Naomi didn't seem very happy about it, but she obeyed. And one day, I heard my mother talking quietly with my father in the kitchen. "Arnold, if this marriage works out, it's Naomi's salvation. She won't have to work as a maid, won't go through hardship. A man with property, a good man." I didn't quite understand what that meant, but something inside me tightened. Was getting married the only way out for us? Were we only valuable if we got a husband who would support us? I was still small, but I was beginning to realize that the world out there was different for men and women. My brothers could go out, run around, study if they wanted. But Naomi and I, we had to stay quiet, well-behaved, learning to be proper young ladies. When I turned 12 in 1964, Naomi married that man. It was a small celebration at the neighborhood church and then lunch at our house. She left there straight to her husband's house on a ranch far from town. I remember crying hidden in the room because I'd miss my sister. But my mother said that's how it was, that soon it would be my turn too, and I had to be prepared. "Clara, you're pretty, you're capable, you'll get a good match too. You just need to behave properly and wait for the right time." And that's how my childhood years went by, between play, work, school, and that feeling that my future was already somewhat decided, even without me having much say in it. The years passed, and I grew up, becoming a young lady. When I turned 15 in 1967, my father took me out of school. He said it was more than enough, that I already knew how to read and write, and now it was time to help my mother at home and learn real chores. I cried in secret for days because I loved studying, but there was no way. A daughter's opinion didn't matter back then. My mother said, "Clara, too much studying makes a girl uppity. What you need is to learn to be a good wife, a good homemaker. The rest doesn't matter." So I spent my days between the washing tub, the wood stove, the sewing and embroidery my mother taught me. I learned to make lace with old Mrs. Henderson, an elderly neighbor who had fairy hands. I learned to make homemade bread, coffee cakes, apple butter that's typical here in the Midwest. I learned to iron clothes with a coal iron, to wash bed linens in the tub until my arms hurt, to take care of small children because neighbors called me to help with their babies. I became, as they said, a capable young woman. But inside, I felt like a closed cage, you know? I wanted more. I wanted to know the world, have choices, decide my own path. But fate, or rather, the custom of that time, had other plans for me. In September 1971, when I was 19, I met Arthur Miller Fitzgerald at a cousin's wedding. The celebration was at a big ranch, one of those that had a hall with polished wood floors, crystal chandeliers, and tables full of abundant food. I went with my mother and father, all dressed up in a light blue dress we had bought, especially for the occasion. Arthur was there, talking with some men in the corner of the hall. He must have been about 34 at the time, a tall man with dark hair slicked back with pomade, a well-cut gray suit, shiny leather shoes. He had that look of someone who commands, you know? Of someone who's used to being obeyed. And when he looked at me from across the hall, I felt my heart race. I don't know if it was love or if it was fear disguised as enchantment, but something inside me stirred. He came to talk to me, asked my name, whose daughter I was, where I lived. Talked to my father, asked permission to ask me to dance, and there, in the middle of that hall, dancing a waltz, he whispered in my ear, "You're beautiful, Clara. Very beautiful. And I'm a man who gets everything he wants." My father was delighted with Arthur's attention. After all, everyone knew who the Miller Fitzgerald family was, owners of 3 huge ranches around Cedar Falls, cattle breeders, people with real money. On the way home, my father wouldn't stop talking. "Clara, did you see? A man like that looking at you? It's your chance to have a good life, girl. Don't mess this up." Arthur started visiting me at home. Every week he'd show up, always bringing gifts, a box of chocolates, a silk scarf, flowers. He'd talk with my father in the living room while I served coffee and cake, quiet, as was expected of me. Then he'd ask to take a walk around the nearby park, always with my mother or a sister nearby, because dating alone was improper. He spoke nicely, that Arthur. He talked about how he'd give me a comfortable life, a big house, maids to help me, pretty dresses, plenty. He painted a golden future, and I, who had spent my whole life watching my mother break her back to support the house, thought that was salvation. I didn't love Arthur, not in that way you see in movies, you know, but I thought love came later, that it was something built with time. And above all, I thought I had no choice. My father had already given his word, and refusing such a marriage would be a shame for the entire family. We got engaged in December 1971 and married in March 1972 in a beautiful ceremony at the Cedar Falls Methodist Church. I was 20, he was 35. I was nervous, but also hopeful. I thought life was going to change for the better. Oh, how wrong I was. Right after the wedding, we went to live in a big house Arthur had in the central area of town. A 2-story house with a front and backyard, iron gate, hardwood furniture, all very fine. But that house, as beautiful as it was, had a heavy air. Arthur's father, old Gerald Miller Fitzgerald, lived with us. He was a man of almost 70, already somewhat sickly, who spent his days in a rocking chair on the porch, smoking cigars and reading the newspaper. He barely spoke to me, just looked at me with those deep-set eyes, as if evaluating me, judging me. 2 weeks after the wedding, old Gerald had a stroke during the night. We woke up to the sound of the maid screaming. When we got to his room, he was already lifeless, mouth open and eyes glazed. Arthur stood there, looking at his father's body, without crying, without showing anything. He just said, "Finally." The funeral was pompous, full of important people from Cedar Falls and the region. Arthur was in black, serious, greeting everyone with that proprietor's air. I was beside him, in a black dress and veil, not quite understanding what was happening. Everything had been so fast. The wedding, my father-in-law's death, that new world where I'd been thrown without an instruction manual. 3 days after the burial, the family lawyer, Mr. Eustace, came to the house for the reading of the will. It was in the dining room, at that huge mahogany table. There were me, Arthur, the lawyer, and 2 more ranch partners. Mr. Eustace opened his leather briefcase, took out some documents, adjusted his glasses on his nose, and began to read in that monotonous voice of someone reading official papers. When he got to the inheritance part, I saw Arthur's face change. He turned red, then white. His hands gripped the chair arms so hard his knuckles turned white. The will said this. I'll never forget the words. I leave all my properties, assets, and values to my son, Arthur Miller Fitzgerald, with the following restrictive clause. The total inheritance will only be released when there is a legitimate heir who guarantees the continuation of the family name. Until this heir is born and registered, my son will receive only a monthly allowance of a value stipulated by the managing partners. This decision aims to ensure that the wealth built by generations is not wasted, but rather preserved for the future. Arthur exploded. He pounded his fist on the table, shouted that it was absurd, that his father had no right to humiliate him like that he was a grown man and didn't need any damn clause to prove anything. But, Mr. Eustace said calmly that a will is a will, that it had legal validity, and if Arthur wanted to contest it, it would take years in court and wouldn't amount to anything. Your father knew you, Arthur. He did what he thought best. When everyone left, Arthur locked himself in the office. I stayed in the living room, frightened, not knowing what to do. Hours later, he came out. His look was different, cold, calculating. He came to me, grabbed my chin hard, looked me in the eyes and said, "Clara, I need to tell you something about this will. My father was a cruel man. The truth is, he doesn't want grandchildren. The clause says exactly the opposite of what you heard. He forbade children. If we have a baby, I lose everything. We'll be poor on the street. You understand? We can never have children." I was paralyzed. I tried to say that wasn't what the lawyer had read, but Arthur cut me off with a shout. "You think you understand wills? You who barely finished elementary school? I studied. I know how to read these things. Are you going to trust me, your husband, or are you going to keep doubting?" I lowered my head. I was young, naive, and had been raised to obey my husband. So I believed him. I believed the cruelest lie anyone ever told me, and that's how my personal hell began. The months following that conversation were the loneliest of my life. Arthur completely changed with me. He, who had been attentive, gallant, became a cold and distant man. He spent his days locked in the office, doing accounts, meeting with partners, managing what remained of his father's empire. And I stayed in that huge house with only the maid, Mrs. Olson, to keep me company. He started isolating me from everyone. When my mother came to visit, he'd make up excuses, that I wasn't feeling well, that we had an appointment, that it was better to leave it for another day. Gradually, visits became rare. My father had died of a heart attack just 2 months after my wedding, and my mother, widowed and tired, no longer had the strength to insist. My siblings lived their lives, and I became increasingly alone in that mansion that felt like a gilded prison. Arthur also wouldn't let me go out alone. "A rich man's wife is a target for gossip, Clara. You're not going to parade around town alone like just anyone," he'd say. So I stayed there, within 4 walls, embroidering, reading old magazines I found in the library, talking with Mrs. Olson while she cleaned the house. It was an empty life, without purpose, without love. And the worst of all was the constant pressure. Every time we went to some social event, a dinner with partners, Sunday mass, a party of some acquaintance, people would ask, "So, Arthur, when's the heir coming? Aren't you and Clara going to give old Gerald a grandchild?" And Arthur would smile that yellow smile and say, "Ah, these things come in God's time." But when we got home, he'd take it out on me. Did you see the humiliation? Everyone demanding a child, and here I am stuck because of a cursed will that prohibits me from having what every normal family has. I tried to comfort him, but he'd push me away rudely. And deep down, I also suffered, because I wanted to be a mother. I saw my childhood friends pushing baby strollers down the street, with that tired but also fulfilled look, and I felt a huge emptiness in my chest. But I thought that was the price to pay for having comfort, for not going through hardship. That's what I repeated to myself every night before sleeping. At least you're not hungry, Clara. At least you have a roof and food on the table. It was in August 1972, about 5 months after the wedding, that Arthur came home with news. He called me to the living room, told me to sit down, and said in that controlled voice of his, "Clara, I've made an appointment for you with a doctor. Dr. Sawyer, a gynecologist friend of mine. You've been going to the bathroom a lot lately, complaining of pain. I think it might be some problem with your ovaries, maybe a cyst. We're going to do some tests." I hadn't even complained of any pain, but when I tried to say that, he cut me off. "Don't be stubborn, Clara. I noticed. And I want you to be healthy. After all, even though we can't have children, I need a healthy wife by my side." I agreed because I'd never been to a gynecologist before and thought maybe it was indeed good to do some tests. The appointment was at a private clinic in a nice building downtown. Dr. Sawyer was a middle-aged man with glasses and impeccable white coat who examined me and ordered some blood and urine tests. Arthur stayed in the room the whole time, supervising everything, as if I were a child incapable of speaking for myself. A week later, we went back there to get the results. "Doctor." Sawyer called Arthur into his private office, and they stayed in there for almost half an hour while I waited in the outer room. When they came out, Arthur had a serious expression. "It's as I imagined, Clara. You have a cyst on your ovary. You'll need surgery." "Surgery?" I felt a chill run down my spine. "But is it serious? Is it dangerous?" I asked, my voice trembling. Arthur put his hand on my shoulder, but his touch had no affection. "It's simple, Clara. The doctor will remove the cyst, and you'll be fine. Everything's already scheduled for next week. You'll check in the morning, have the surgery, and the next day you'll be back home." I had no one to ask, no one to advise me. Mrs. Olson, when she found out, was worried. "Oh, my dear, surgery is serious business. Are you sure you need it?" she asked while packing my little suitcase. But what could I do? My husband and the doctor had decided, and I had no knowledge to question. On the morning of the surgery, Arthur took me to the clinic very early. The sky was gray, cold, with that fine Iowa winter drizzle that soaks to the bone. The clinic was empty, silent, smelling of disinfectant and ether. A nurse took me to a little room, told me to put on that hospital gown, that thin cloth that leaves you exposed and vulnerable. I was shaking, from cold, from fear, from an anguish I didn't know where it came from. They laid me on a gurney, put an IV in my arm. The nurse applied something to the vein and said, "This is just to help you relax a little before anesthesia." I felt dizzy, a weakness taking over my body. Everything got kind of slow, kind of blurry. Arthur was there, standing beside the gurney, looking at me. And it was at that moment, when I was already too weak to react, that he leaned down very close to my ear. What he said at that moment, I'll never forget. I won't repeat the exact words because they still hurt me, but the meaning was clear. He had lied. There was no cyst. He had paid Dr. Sawyer to do something terrible to me, to ensure I could never give him what the will required. He said he wasn't going to share the inheritance with anyone, that he had plans to forge documents later, and that I was just an obstacle that needed to be neutralized. He whispered all of that in that cold voice while I tried to scream, tried to move, but my body wouldn't obey. I was paralyzed, helpless, at his mercy. Arthur left the room with a smile at the corner of his mouth. I heard the door close. I tried to call the nurse, but my voice came out weak, almost inaudible. Tears ran down the corners of my eyes, wetting the pillow. I was trapped there, waiting for a man in a white coat to do something irreversible to me, something that would kill my dream of being a mother, that would transform me forever. That's when Dr. Sawyer came in. He came straight to the gurney, checked the equipment, vital signs, blood pressure. I looked at him with desperation, with pleading in my eyes. He saw it. I know he saw it because he stopped, looked back at me, and I saw something pass across his face. A conflict, a doubt, maybe even remorse. He stood there for seconds that seemed like hours. Then he approached, as if to adjust the oxygen mask on my face. But instead, he did something I didn't expect. He slipped something small and folded into my closed hand, squeezed my fingers around it, and whispered so quietly I almost didn't hear. "Read later. Trust me." Before I could process what had happened, he put the mask on my face, and the anesthesia gas began pulling me into a deep, dark sleep. The last thing I remember thinking was, "God, if you exist, help me." And then everything went black. I woke up in a white room with that cold hospital light hitting my eyes. My mouth was dry, my throat scratchy as if I'd swallowed sand, and there was a dull pain in my lower abdomen, as if someone had been inside with cold, metal instruments. It took me a few seconds to remember where I was, what had happened. Everything was foggy, confused, like when you wake up from a nightmare and don't quite know what was real and what was a dream. But then memory came back, clear and cruel as a punch to the stomach. Arthur whispering those words in my ear while I was paralyzed on the gurney. My total helplessness, my body weak from sedatives, my voice that wouldn't come out, my arms that wouldn't move. The silent desperation of someone being taken to slaughter and can't do anything to save themselves. I felt nausea rising in my throat, a desire to vomit that was both physical and emotional, my body rejecting the horror of what had happened. I tried to move, but my body was heavy, sluggish, as if it had lead in the veins instead of blood. The anesthesia still hadn't completely worn off. There was a bandage on my belly, covered with that rough hospital fabric that itched the skin. I looked around slowly, turning my head carefully, because even that hurt. The room was empty, no nurse, no doctor, and no Arthur, thank God. I was alone with my despair, and with a terrible certainty hammering in my head like a church bell announcing a funeral. He had done it. He had cut me up inside. He had destroyed my ability to be a mother. I would never again be able to carry a life inside me, to feel a baby moving in my belly, to breastfeed, to rock a child in my arms. All of that had been torn from me by force, without my consent, by a man who should have loved and protected me. The tears came without control, wetting the pillow, running down my neck, entering the corners of my mouth with that salty taste of pure desperation. I cried quietly, stifling sobs, afraid someone would hear, afraid of seeming weak, but also because there was no one there to comfort me anyway. I didn't have my mother nearby. She was far away, old, tired, and didn't even really know what I was going through. I didn't have siblings. They had their own lives and barely remembered me since I'd gotten married. I didn't have friends. Arthur had cut all my ties with the world. I was completely alone in that universe, at the mercy of a man who didn't love me, who saw me only as an obstacle, as a thing that needed to be controlled, dominated, and finally destroyed. I looked at the white ceiling, at the simple lamp hanging there, and thought, is it worth continuing? Wouldn't it be better to let everything end here? But something inside me, a stubborn spark, a strength I didn't even know I had, said no. It won't be like this. It won't end like this. I won't let him win. That's when I felt something strange in my right hand. A slight discomfort, a weird sensation, as if there was something folded between my fingers, stuck by perspiration. I frowned, confused. What was that? I opened my hand slowly, with difficulty because my fingers were stiff, and saw a tiny piece of crumpled paper, somewhat damp from the sweat that had run through my palm during surgery. The note. My heart leaped in my chest. The doctor had put a note in my hand before anesthesia. I had completely forgotten, but now the memory came back like a flash. Him approaching, adjusting the oxygen mask, sliding that folded paper into my closed hand, whispering, "Trust me." But trust in what? What had he written there? With trembling fingers so much I could barely hold the paper, I unfolded that tiny piece with all care, as if it were something sacred. The handwriting was hurried, somewhat crooked, written in pencil almost illegibly. I didn't do the tubal ligation. I only made a superficial cut in the skin to leave a scar. And I have news. The pre-operative tests showed you're already pregnant, 3 weeks along. Protect this child. Arthur can't know. S. I read once, read twice, read 3 times, blinking to make sure I was reading right, that it wasn't a hallucination from anesthesia, that those words were really written there. Pregnant? I was pregnant? But how? When had it happened? And Dr. Sawyer. He hadn't really cut me. He had only pretended. He had risked everything, his friendship with Arthur, maybe even his medical license, to spare me. My mind went into a whirlwind of emotions so intense, so contradictory, that I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. My whole body shook in the bed. Tears still fell, but now they were different tears. Of relief, shock, gratitude, terror, hope, all mixed into one thing. I put my hand over my belly, over the bandage covering that superficial cut that meant nothing, and felt something I had never felt before in my life. A deep, instantaneous, visceral connection with that tiny little life growing inside me without me knowing. My son, or my daughter, my baby, the heir Arthur so feared, the grandchild the will required, the child who would change everything, turn everything upside down, destroy all that man's cruel plans. But along with the explosive joy that made my chest seem too small to contain everything I was feeling, came ice-cold terror. Arthur thought I was sterile now. Arthur thought he had won, that he had eliminated the problem, that he had guaranteed total control of the situation. If he found out I was pregnant, what would he do to me? Would he try to force me to get rid of the baby? Would he push me down the stairs? Would he put poison in my food? Or worse, would he try to make me disappear completely, pretend it was an accident, bury me somewhere, and tell everyone I had run away? I knew what he was capable of. A man who pays a doctor to mutilate his own wife is capable of anything. I squeezed the note in my hand, crumpling it into a tiny ball, the size of a pea. I couldn't leave a trace. I couldn't let Arthur find that paper. If he discovered the doctor had betrayed him, or rather, had saved me, he might go after Dr. Sawyer too. And I couldn't put at risk the life of the only man who had the courage to help me. When the nurse came into the room about 10 minutes later, I had already shoved that paper ball under my body, hidden between the sheet and mattress. And when she asked, with that mechanically cheerful voice of someone repeating the same phrase 50 times a day, "How are you feeling, Mrs. Clara?" I said with a weak but controlled voice, "I'm fine, just tired. I just want to go home and rest." Arthur showed up late in the afternoon, when the sun was already setting outside, and the room was getting orange with the light coming through the window. He entered with a bouquet of red roses. What cruel irony, what disgusting hypocrisy, and that satisfied smile of someone who had just won an important battle. "How's my wife?" he asked, kissing my forehead coldly, with that dry kiss that had no affection, no human warmth. I had to make a superhuman effort not to turn my face away from him in disgust, not to spit in his face, not to scream all the truth stuck in my throat. But I controlled myself, because now I had a trump card. Now I had a secret. Now I had power, even if he didn't know it. "I'm fine," I lied, looking at him with that sacrificial lamb face he expected to see. "The doctor said everything went well. He removed the cyst and did what needed to be done." "Great," Arthur replied, sitting in the chair next to the bed and crossing his legs with that relaxed pose of someone who doesn't have a worry in the world. Now you can recover in peace, and we can go on with our lives without worries. He said, without worries, with so much relief in his voice, with so much poorly disguised pleasure, that I felt hatred. True hatred, deep, visceral, the kind that burns inside and leaves a taste of bile in the mouth. But I smiled. I smiled and said, yes, finally we can live in peace. And inside, I thought, you have no idea what's coming, Arthur. You have no clue. We went home the next day. I faked weakness, faked pain, faked being devastated for having lost my fertility. I cried false tears when Mrs. Olson hugged me and said, "Oh, my dear, what a sadness. But God knows what he does." Arthur treated me with that fake, mechanical kindness of someone caring for a sick pet. He had Mrs. Olson make chicken broths, herbal teas, bring me extra pillows. But he didn't sleep with me that night, nor the following nights. He slept in the guest room, so as not to disturb me during recovery, he said. But I knew the truth. He was no longer interested in me. I had fulfilled my role, or rather, had been neutralized. Now I was just a decoration in his house, a decorative wife he kept for social appearances. And it was there, on those nights alone, lying in that huge, cold bed, with my hand over the belly that still showed no sign but held the biggest secret of my life, that I began making plans. Secret, silent, strategic plans that I couldn't share with anyone. I needed to protect my baby. I needed to buy time. I needed to make Arthur believe he had won, while I, inside, prepared my revenge. A just, deserved revenge that would come at the right time. In the following weeks, I was the best actress that ever existed. I faked deep sadness when someone mentioned babies in conversations. I faked that I had accepted my cruel fate of never being a mother. I faked being at peace with everything, that I was conforming, that I was learning to live with that loss. But inside, I was at war. A silent, calculated, strategic war, where every move had to be thought out with millimeter precision. I knew I had a few months' advantage. The belly would only start showing around the 4th, 5th month of pregnancy. Until then, I could hide with loose clothes, shawls, tight girdles when necessary, with excuses about having gained a little weight recovering from surgery. But I needed a bigger, more solid plan. I needed outside help. I needed someone who could protect me when the truth finally came out and hell broke loose. That's when I remembered the lawyer. Mr. Eustace, that serious man with glasses and a gray suit who had read the will months ago. He knew the truth. He knew the clause was exactly the opposite of what Arthur had told me. He knew an heir was necessary, not forbidden. Would he help me? Did he have any legal power to protect me? Or was he loyal to Arthur and would turn me in? I started making secret calls. When Arthur went out to the ranches to supervise the cattle or to meetings with partners to discuss business, I used the heavy black telephone in the living room and called Mr. Eustace's office downtown. My heart beat so hard I thought it would come out of my mouth. The first 3 times, I only managed to speak with his secretary, a woman with a formal voice who said the gentleman was busy. But I insisted, called again and again. Said it was urgent, that it was about the will of the deceased Gerald Miller Fitzgerald, that it was a delicate matter that could only be discussed with him personally. And finally, on a rainy September morning, when the cold wind beat against the windows and Cedar Falls was gray and melancholic, Mr. Eustace answered the phone personally. "Mrs. Clara?" he said, with that deep, careful voice of an experienced lawyer who knows every word can have consequences. "How can I help you? My secretary said it's urgent." I took a deep breath. I looked at the living room door, checking if Mrs. Olson was far away in the kitchen, if Arthur hadn't returned by surprise. I listened to the sound of rain outside, the tick-tock of the wall clock, the heavy silence of the house. And then I said, in a low but firm voice, each word heavy with meaning, "Sir, I need to know the truth about the will. Arthur told me the clause prohibited children." That if we had a baby, he'd lose everything and we'd be poor. But that's not it, is it? I heard you read that day, the inheritance only comes with an heir, not without. Am I right or am I crazy? There was a heavy silence on the other end of the line, a long, thoughtful silence that made me nervous. Had I made a mistake? Was he going to report me to Arthur? But then Mr. Eustace's voice came, slow and careful. Mrs. Clara, you are absolutely correct. The clause requires a legitimate heir, a grandchild, for the full release of the inheritance. Without an heir, Arthur receives only the stipulated allowance. Why did Arthur tell you the opposite? That makes no sense whatsoever. I couldn't answer properly. My voice failed, got stuck in my throat, along with a sob I was trying to swallow. Tears came back, wetting my face. But the lawyer was smart and experienced. He understood that something very wrong was happening in that house. Mrs. Clara, he said slowly, with genuine concern in his voice. Are you in danger? Do you need immediate help? Do you want me to come there? Not yet, I replied, wiping tears with the back of my hand, trying to regain control. Not yet, sir, but I'll need help soon. Very soon. And when I need it, will you be on my side? Mrs. Clara, he said firmly, truth is truth. Law is law, and I serve both. When you need me, I'll be here. And so, with that promise kept in my heart, like a protective talisman, I planted the first seed of my liberation. The following months were the most difficult and at the same time, the most strategic of my life. I lived a constant lie, but it was a necessary lie to survive. During the day, I was the sad and resigned wife Arthur wanted me to be. At night, alone in the room, I talked quietly with my baby, ran my hand over the growing belly, and made promises. I'll protect you. No matter what happens, you'll be born and have everything that's rightfully yours. Hiding the pregnancy was a challenge that required all my creativity. In the 3rd month, when the belly was still almost imperceptible, I started wearing looser dresses, loose blouses over skirts. I told Arthur and Mrs. Olson I had gained a little weight recovering from surgery, that the doctor said it was normal because of hormones. In the 4th month, I had to be more careful. I bought some girdles at a discreet store in another town, far from Cedar Falls, where no one knew me. I wore those tight girdles under my clothes, and over them, large shawls, heavy coats, even when it wasn't that cold. I made up that I had constant chills, that I couldn't warm up properly. Arthur barely paid attention to me anyway. He was increasingly obsessed with the inheritance money, with that allowance he found humiliating, with plans to somehow circumvent the will. He spent hours locked in the office with partners, doing accounts, discussing strategies. Sometimes I heard their conversations through the door. They talked about forging certificates, bribing registry officials, creating a fictitious heir on paper. Anything but accept that Arthur would have to have a real child. Meanwhile, I secretly met with Mr. Eustace. They were careful, planned meetings. I'd pretend I was going to church or visiting my mother, and actually go to his office downtown. He was an upright man, that lawyer. When I told him the whole truth, Arthur's lie about the will, the forced surgery that didn't really happen, the secret pregnancy, he was shocked. But he didn't judge me. On the contrary, he said, Mrs. Clara, this man committed serious crimes, coercion, attempted bodily harm, fraud, and when you reveal you're pregnant, he'll lose any and all rights to the inheritance. Together, we planned every detail. Doctor Sawyer, that doctor who had saved me, provided all the reports, the pre-operative tests showing my pregnancy, the surgical report where he described what he really did, just a superficial cut. Everything documented and signed. He risked his own career for me, and I'll never forget that. Mr. Eustace kept these documents secret, waiting for the right moment. When you reveal it, Mrs. Clara, he advised me one December afternoon while we had tea in his office, it needs to be in public. There need to be important witnesses, People who can't be bought or intimidated by Arthur. That's the only way you'll be protected. We waited for the perfect opportunity. And it came in January 1973, when I was 5 months pregnant. Arthur organized a dinner at our house, a pompous dinner, with the 3 main ranch partners, 2 lawyers he had hired to resolve the inheritance issue, and even the county judge, Judge Walden, an important man Arthur wanted to impress. The dinner's objective was to present a plan to release the money without fulfilling the will's clause. Arthur was confident, thinking he was going to fool everyone. I spent the day preparing everything with Mrs. Olson. The table was set with fine china, silver cutlery, crystal glasses. The food was elaborate: roasted chicken, wild rice, salads, stuffing, imported wine. I was nervous, but didn't let it show. That was my night. That was the moment of truth. When the guests arrived, around 7 at night, I stayed in the room getting ready. Mr. Eustace had arrived too. Arthur didn't even know I had invited his father's lawyer, but I said it was protocol, that he needed to be present in any discussion about the inheritance. Arthur didn't like it, but couldn't refuse in front of everyone. I let them have dinner first. I stayed listening from upstairs, the conversations, the laughter, Arthur with that fake host voice, offering more wine, telling jokes, charming everyone. After dessert, when they went to the living room to smoke cigars and drink cognac, Arthur began presenting his plan. I heard fragments, him talking about adopting a child and registering as if it were a biological child, bribing doctors to make false documents, finding legal loopholes in the will. That's when I came down the stairs. I had changed in the room, took off the tight girdle I'd been wearing for months, took off the loose clothes, the shawls, all the artifices, put on a dress I had bought in secret, a dress of fine fabric, dark green, fitted to the body, hugging every curve, every volume. And the belly. Oh, the 5-month belly, round, unmistakable, was there exposed for everyone to see. I went down step by step, slowly, holding the handrail. My heart beat so hard I thought I'd faint, but I breathed deeply and continued. When I reached the living room door, everyone was turned forward, listening to Arthur speak. I cleared my throat softly. One of the partners saw me first, and his eyes widened. Then another. Then the judge. Everyone fell silent, looking at me, more specifically at my belly, with that expression of someone who can't believe what they're seeing. Arthur turned his head slowly. When he saw me, the cognac glass he was holding slipped from his fingers and fell on the carpet, spilling that amber liquid. His face went white, completely colorless, as if he'd seen a ghost. He got up staggering from the armchair, pointing at me with a trembling finger, and shouted with a strangled voice, That's impossible! You're sterilized! You can't be pregnant! I paid the doctor to cut you!" Absolute silence in the room. Everyone looked at him, shocked. The judge also stood up, frowning. "What did you just say, Arthur?" Arthur realized his mistake too late. He had given himself away, had confessed in front of important witnesses, a judge, 3 respected businessmen, 2 lawyers. He tried to backtrack, stammering, "No, that's not what I meant. I meant to say..." But I didn't let him. I entered the room with my head held high, with all the dignity that had been crushed during those months. "He said exactly what you heard." My voice came out firm, clear. "Arthur told me his father's will prohibited children, that if I got pregnant he'd lose everything. It was a lie. He took me to a clinic last August saying I had a cyst, but actually he'd paid the doctor to do surgery that would make me sterile. He wanted to ensure I could never give him the heir the will requires." Mr. Eustace stood up, took the leather briefcase he had brought, and pulled out the documents we had prepared. "Gentlemen," he said with that lawyer's voice that doesn't accept contestation, "I have here all the medical reports. The preoperative tests showing Mrs. Clara was already 3 weeks pregnant when taken to surgery. Dr. Sawyer's report describing that for ethical reasons he refused to do the procedure Arthur demanded and only made a superficial cut to simulate surgery. And I have the doctor's own statement, notarized, confessing everything. He distributed copies of the documents to the lawyers and judge. Arthur was paralyzed, watching his whole world crumble. The judge read the papers carefully, with that serious face of someone processing something grave. Then he looked at Arthur with contempt. "Mr. Miller Fitzgerald, what you did constitutes crimes of coercion and attempted serious bodily harm. And as for the inheritance," Mr. Eustace completed, "Gerald Miller Fitzgerald's will is very clear. There's a secondary clause that establishes, in case of moral incapacity, bad faith or crime committed by the heir Arthur against the gestation or birth of a legitimate heir, legal guardianship of the fortune shall pass entirely to the child's mother until the child reaches adulthood. That is, due to the crimes Arthur committed trying to prevent the birth of his own child, he lost any and all rights to the inheritance. Mrs. Clara is now the legal administrator of the entire fortune on behalf of the baby she carries." It was as if a bomb had exploded in that room. The partners all started talking at once. The judge said he'd open an inquiry. Arthur's lawyers tried to argue, but there was no possible argument. The crime had been confessed in front of witnesses. The documents were legal and incontestable. Arthur looked at me with such deep hatred I felt a chill. "You bitch," he hissed through his teeth. "You tricked me. You set all this up." "No, Arthur," I replied, putting my protective hand over my belly. "You set it up against me. I just survived, and my son will have everything that's rightfully his, everything you tried to steal." That same night, by order of the judge and accompanied by the partners who wanted to protect the ranch's assets, Arthur was expelled from the house. He left with only the clothes on his back and the allowance he'd continue receiving, that same allowance he so despised. The mansion, the ranches, the money, everything passed to my legal administration. And I, who had been treated as nothing, as a disposable object, became the richest woman in Cedar Falls overnight. But more important than the money, I had become free. My son was born in June 1973 on a sunny Iowa autumn day. I named him Philip, in honor of no one in particular. I just wanted him to have a nice name, a name that was his alone, without carrying the weight of any past story. When I held that little baby in my arms for the first time, with those dark little eyes looking at me with absolute trust, I swore to myself, this boy will grow up knowing he's loved. He'll never feel what I felt. And I kept that promise. I raised my Philip with all the love in the world. He never lacked anything. Good food, clean clothes, private school, music teachers, English teachers, everything he needed to have a good and dignified life. But more important than that, I gave him what no money can buy: presence, affection, attention. I was there at every school party, every football game, every important moment. And when he asked questions about his father, I told the truth in a way a child could understand. Your father didn't know how to be a father, my son. But you have a mother who loves you for two. Arthur never set foot in our house again. He continued receiving the will's allowance. It was enough for him to live modestly, but nothing compared to the fortune he had lost. I heard he went to live in Des Moines, that he tried some businesses that didn't work out, that he became bitter and lonely. In 1989, he died of a heart attack, alone in a rented apartment. When I received the news, I felt neither joy nor sadness. Just emptiness, a realization that that man had wasted his whole life chasing money and died without having anything that really mattered. I managed the fortune responsibly. The ranches continued producing. The businesses prospered under the management of the honest partners my father-in-law had chosen. I signed the necessary papers, participated in important meetings, but always with Mr. Eustace by my side guiding me. When Philip turned 18 in 1991, he legally inherited everything, as the will determined. But he, whom I had raised with good values, consulted me on everything. "Mom," he'd say, "you fought for this. You deserve to decide." Together, we decided to do something good with that money. We sold one of the ranches and used the money to build a public school in Cedar Falls, a beautiful school where poor children could study with dignity. We donated to hospitals, nursing homes, institutions that cared for women in vulnerable situations. We didn't do it to show off. We did it because it was right, because I knew what it was like to need help and not have it. Philip grew up, graduated in agricultural studies, married a good woman named Lucy, and gave me 3 wonderful grandchildren who are the light of my life. He lives nearby, in a house he built about 10 minutes from mine, and takes care of the remaining lands from the inheritance with competence and love for the land. He's a good, hard-working, honest man. Everything his father wasn't. And I, after so many years managing fortunes and solving complicated issues, decided to simplify my life. When I turned 70, I passed all legal responsibilities to Philip and retired for real. Today, at 73, I live here in this simple little house in Cedar Falls, the town where I was born and where I intend to die. It's not the mansion where I lived with Arthur. I sold that a long time ago, couldn't bear the memories of those walls. It's a small, cozy house with a huge garden that's my passion and my therapy. I wake up early every day, make my coffee with milk, eat a piece of cornbread or pound cake, and go to the garden. It's there, working the soil, watering the flowers, talking to the plants, that I find my peace. Each rose that blooms is a small victory. Each seed that germinates is a reminder that life always finds a way to continue, even after the most terrible storms. My grandchildren come visit almost every weekend. They're between 8 and 15 years old and love coming here to eat my cake, play in the garden, hear my stories. Not all of them, of course. Some stories are too heavy for young ears. But I tell them about my childhood, about old times in Cedar Falls, about how life was different. And they hug me and say, "Grandma, you're the best in the world." My life today is simple, but it's full. I have my church friends with whom I have coffee on Sunday afternoons. I have my son who calls me every day to see if I'm well. I have my daughter-in-law who brings me meals when she knows I'm too tired to cook. I have my grandchildren who fill my house with noise and joy. I have my garden, my books, my memories, the good and the bad, because the bad ones also taught me who I am. When I look back, to my 20 years old when that nightmare began, I barely recognize that scared and naive girl I was. Today's Clara is strong, wise, free. I survived the worst that one human being can do to another, and not only survived, I won. I transformed pain into fight, and fight into victory. And from that victory was born a good life, a loving family, a legacy of dignity. I have no resentment in my heart. Arthur paid his price while still alive, becoming bitter in loneliness for everything he planted with his own wickedness. I, on the other hand, still harvest today the fruits of love, courage, and faith that never completely abandoned me, even in the darkest moments. And that's how, my dear ones, surrounded by flowers and love, I live my days here in Cedar Falls, on the same land where I was born, grateful for each dawn, for each hug, for each small joy that life still has in store for me. My dear ones, if you're listening now and going through something similar, if someone is controlling you, manipulating you, making you believe lies to keep you trapped in a situation of suffering, I want you to know something. You're not alone. And as impossible as it may seem at this moment, there's a way out. There's always a way out. I learned some things in these more than 50 years since I lived that nightmare. The first thing I learned is that when a man or a woman or any person tries to take from you control over your own body, over your own choices, that person doesn't love you, they possess you. And being possessed isn't love, it's prison. True love respects, honors, protects. True love doesn't lie, doesn't manipulate, doesn't hurt. The second thing I learned is that truth always wins in the end. It may take time, it may hurt, it may seem like lies are stronger, but they're not. Truth has its own strength, a light that can't be extinguished by any darkness. When I came down those stairs with my belly showing, I was carrying the living truth inside me, and that truth destroyed all the lies Arthur had built. The third thing is that you're stronger than you imagine. I was a 20-year-old girl, without education, without resources, without anyone to defend me. But when necessary, I found strength where I didn't even know it existed. I learned to plan, to wait for the right moment, to be strategic. And you also have that strength inside you, even if you can't see it yet. If you're being controlled, manipulated, threatened, seek help. Talk to someone you trust. It could be a family member, a friend, a religious leader, a healthcare professional, your country's authorities. In every place in the world, there are people and organizations ready to help those in vulnerable situations. Don't be ashamed. Don't be afraid. The shame isn't yours. It belongs to whoever hurts you. Fear can be overcome when you're no longer alone. And if you know someone going through this, be the help that person needs. Be the doctor. Sawyer, who had the courage to do what's right, even at risk. Be the Mr. Eustace who chose justice instead of loyalty to money. Be the Mrs. Olson who, even being just a maid, treated me with affection when I most needed it. Small acts of kindness can save lives. I transformed the poison they gave me into medicine. I transformed pain into strength. I transformed the attempt to destroy me into a reason to fight. And today, when I look at my blooming garden, when I hug my grandchildren, when I see my son being the honorable man his father never was, I know I won. And you can win too. Life always finds a way to flourish, even in the most arid soil. You are that life. You are that flower that will bloom despite everything. Thank you for listening to me until now, for giving me this space to tell my story. Each one of you on the other side, listening to me, is part of my healing. Because speaking, sharing, is a way of freeing what was trapped inside the chest for so long. And now, my dear ones, my precious ones, I need to make a very important request. If this story touched your heart, if you believe it needs to be heard by more people, especially by those women and men who are trapped in similar situations, I ask you, from the bottom of my heart, subscribe to Grandparents' Tales now. Hit that subscribe button, turn on the notification bell. Because each subscription is a way to make stories like mine reach those who need to hear them. It's a way of saying, I care, I believe in the power of truth, I want to be part of this chain of hope. And leave here in the comments just one word that summarizes what you felt hearing this story. It could be courage, it could be justice, it could be hope, it could be freedom. I'll read each comment, each word, and I'll know my story wasn't in vain. Do it now, don't wait another minute, because while you're here, there might be someone suffering and needing to hear that it's possible to win. May God bless each one of you. May you find strength in your battles, and may you never, ever give up on flourishing.